In this session, we are going to provide a multi-dimensional categorization of cluster analysis. Cluster analysis can be viewed in many different ways. We will provide a multi-dimensional categorization on all the different methods. The first categorization is based on techniques. Based on different techniques employed in cluster analysis, we can consider these are density-based methods, or they are distance-based methods, or grid-based methods, or probabilistic generative model-based methods. Or we are essentially using dimensionality reduction methods to reduce the dimensions before we do effective clustering. Or we can directly perform high-dimensional clustering. Or whether the methods are scalable for large data analysis. And the second categorization is based on data type centered. So that means different kinds of data types likely will use rather different clustering methods. For example, how to cluster numerical data, category data, text data, multimedia data, time series data, sequence data, stream data, network data, or uncertain data. The third categorization is whether we can provide additional insights for clustering. For example, we can provide visual insights, or we can incorporate some kind of slightly supervision. Or we can use ensemble-based methods, or we can use validation-based methods. All these we are going to get into more detail in the next sessions. Thank you. In this session, we are going to provide a brief overview of typical clustering methodologies. There are many clustering methods. They can be roughly categorized into a few clustering methodologies. The first methodology called distance-based methods. Essentially, there are two kinds of methods. One called partitioning algorithms. The other we call hierarchical algorithms. Partitioning algorithms essentially is partitioning the data in the high dimension space into multiple clusters. The typical methods include k-means, k-medians, k-medians. Those methods we are going to introduce. For hierarchical algorithms, essentially we can either doing agglomerative, or we call bottom-up, merging many points into clusters, merging small clusters into bigger ones, then form hierarchical clusters. Or we can use divisive methods. Start with a single big, all the data I think is in one cluster, then we try to split them, divide them using the top-down splitting into smaller and smaller clusters. Then the second methodology called density-based methods, the third one called grid-based methods. Of course, they have some linkages as well. Density-based method essentially is we can think the database space may, at a higher level granularity, may think about it with certain grid or certain structures or certain k-nearest neighbors, we may find certain density. For the dense small regions, we can merge them into bigger regions. In this way, we will be able to find clusters, those are dense regions, with arbitrary shape. The grid-based method essentially is partitioning the data space into grid-like structures. Then each grid is kind of a summary of the characteristics of the data in the lower grid or lower cells. Then the third methodology called probabilistic and generative models. That means we can model data from a generative process. We can assume underneath there's certain distribution, for example, mixture of Gaussian. Okay. Then with the data, we can think the current points are generated from these underlying generative model, underlying generative mechanisms. Then we can model parameters using an expectation maximization algorithm we are going to introduce. Based on the available data sets, we may try to find the maximum likelihood fit. Based on this fit, we will be able to estimate the generative probability of the underlying data points. And based on this, we may find the models. Then, in many cases, data may be sitting in a high-dimensional space. We may need to study high-dimensional clustering methods. One influential method called subspace clustering essentially try to find clusters on various subspaces. Okay. So that method can be categorized into bottom-up methods, top-down, high-dimension clustering method, or correlation-based methods. We will also introduce some interesting method like a delta clustering. Then, for high-dimension clustering, there are many methods developed for dimensionality reduction. Essentially, is we can think the high dimension is in a vertical form. They contain lots of columns, and for those columns, when we perform clustering, essentially the columns are clustered. The rows or columns can be clustered together. We call co-clustering. Okay. There are several typical methods. One is probabilistic latent semantic indexing. Later, people develop another method called latent dictionary allocation. So PLSI or LDA are typical topic modeling methods for text data. Essentially, we can think the text can be clustered into multiple topics. Each topic is a cluster, and each topic is associated with a set of words, or you can think of their dimensions, and also a set of documents. You can think they are rows simultaneously. Then the second popularly studied method called non-negative matrix factorization, NMF. This is a kind of co-clustering method. You can think is you get a non-negative matrix because the word, like a word frequency in documents, are non-negative. Okay, they are 0 or more, but they are non-negative, values in the matrix. For this non-negative matrix, we can approximately factorize it into two non-negative lower rank matrices like U and V that will reduce the number of dimensions. Another very interesting method we're going to study is called spectral clustering. That means we use a spectrum of the similarity matrix of the data to perform dimensionality reduction. The higher dimension reduced into the lower, fewer dimensions. Then we can perform clustering in fewer dimensions. That's spectral clustering methods. In this course, we are going to study many low dimension and high dimension clustering methods and study their different variations and applications as well.